Good afternoon, everyone. Please find your way to your seats. We'll get started here. Robin's laughing. All right. This session is talking about GC Notify, which is we'll go through what that is in a moment, but before we begin, if I could just get a show of hands, I just want to understand who's in the audience right now. So, who here is a Government of Canada employee? Yes. Okay, good. And who here is working for a Government of Canada, under Government of Canada contract, or doing contracts with Government of Canada? Who here? Okay. The door's over there. You can leave now. All right, and is there anyone here from higher ed? Higher ed? University of Ottawa? Awesome. Love you guys. You'll see in a moment. All right, so Robin's here, so I have to show this slide.
Say you gotta hit recording.
Oh, yes, thank you. I am now recording. So these are our sponsors. Thank you, sponsors. I'm sure you've seen this slide many times. A little bit about this session. So we're going to go over what GC Notify is, how it works, the benefits of going with GC Notify. We'll go over the module, what it is, how it works, configuration options, implementation, or how we've implemented the module, as well as sort of shortcomings and the roadmap for the future. So the general audience, if you've read the sort of synopsis for this, is very high level. It is both for sort of the business side of things as well as on the technical side. And so if you're a business person who is looking at using GC Notify, or you're currently using GC Notify, this session is for you. At the end of it, there's a little bit of technical stuff as well. So I'm not going to go too deep either into the technical nor into the business side of things. So I encourage you afterwards, if you do have questions on either side of those things, to let me know. So it's for both of you. And if you're not interested in GC Notify, perfect.
Interested. Can't use it.
Oh, no worries. Okay, great. Wonderful. Okay, anyone else? No? All right. Okay, so a little bit about me. So I spent 8 years at the University of Ottawa, so this is why I love the University of Ottawa. And during those 8 years, we deployed Drupal. That was my introduction to Drupal. And since that time, I've only been working in Drupal. So I spent 8 years there, the last 10 years or thereabouts at OpenPlus, doing primarily projects in the sort of the government, mostly the government space, the public sector space, whether that be federal government, provincial government, municipal government. I've been participating in various different Drupal camps, as well as various different committees and advisory boards and so on and so forth. So, as they say, I've been around. So a little bit about the OpenPlus team. If you were at the GCDS presentation, you will have seen this already. So this is a little bit about what we do. Given that the majority of you guys are Government of Canada, you probably already know this. But Robin, my boss, is sitting in the front here, so I have to show this slide. Here's the slide. Okay, GC Notify. So who here has heard of GC Notify? Okay. And, okay, so we'll go through this real quickly. So GC Notify, I took this from their website, and I think the CDS guys are here. Where are you? There you go. And so this is from their website. So it's a microservice that's being provided out of CDS. So it's a centralized service, which is great. You can quickly send and review text messages, emails, provides you with compliance for communicating with the general public. It protects personal information. So all the sort of things that you need to generally take care of when you want to be able to communicate with the general public. And really anyone for that matter. But if you've got an application that needs to send email or text messages to the general public, this is sort of built for you. And I'll go through some of the benefits in a moment. To talk about skipping the procurement process. For those of you who don't have to deal with that, thank goodness. But for those of you who do, this is a big part of it, right? Like, you do not need to procure this through sort of a regular procurement vehicle. And then obviously, it's built in such a way that you can go through your experimentation, your trial method, your trials, your testing and it's really built with that sort of deployment methodology in mind. Okay, so some of the benefits. So there's currently a support team in place, so you do not need to. So in the historical sense, what you would normally do is you would set up email, right? And this email would be Office 365. Maybe it's your own server. Maybe in the old days it was a laptop running under someone's desk, right? Like that would be used for sending emails. But the benefit of GC Notify is that there's a whole team that's set aside that supports this for you. It has high reliability. It has the ability to provide you with logs and with information with regards to how your service is performing. And I want to talk about the two next items. So, who here knows what SRTM and ATO are? Okay, and this is because you are working in a space where you need to know this. What do you do?
I've looked at it before putting together applications, so security risk traceability.
That's exactly it. Okay. So this is for the business folks who are in the room. Anytime you've got an application that you're trying to launch for the government of Canada, you need to meet certain security requirements. And those security requirements around emails and collecting email addresses is done at the protected B level. And I'm sure those of you are aware of what protected B means. It means that there is a very high bar to pass this SRTM. So SRTM stands for Security Requirements Traceability Matrix, and it's part of your ATO, which is the authority to operate. And it's a big sort of bar that you have to overcome to be able to launch your particular application. And the SRTM process could be a month-long process, it could be a 6-month-long process, it could be even a 12-month-long process to be able to get through all of those security requirements, have them audited, have them tested, be able to show proof that your application meets those requirements, just so that you can launch your application. One of the big benefits is that you don't have to do that. It's already been done for you. And so we always have these applications, like anyone who's building an application has got to do this, right? So if you think of the number of applications that have been launched at the Government of Canada that require you to communicate with the general public, how many SRTMs do you think we've gone through? A dozen? 50? 100? This is, this is something that we've got to duplicate over and over and over again for basically the same requirement. So if you go and use GC Notify as your method of communicating with the general public, you don't need to do this. And it removes a huge barrier for you to be able to launch your application. So we talked about that overall speed of development or deployment. The last thing I want to mention on here, I think Robin mentioned it this morning, and you may have seen it on the GCDS presentation as well, is sovereignty. So we talk about this a lot because, politics aside, one of the big things that's happened is this over-reliance on foreign technology. We as much as we like to deploy Microsoft, we like to deploy, Azure services, they make things easy for us. We don't gain any benefit from that. We don't gain any reusability from that. Every single time you need to use a Microsoft service, it's another license that gets tacked on. This is internal, it's sovereign, it's reusable, and because it's internal, it's very, very, very simple to procure. And so we're amplifying the notion that this is inbuilt, it's internal, it can be used by everyone. And no one has to go through an SRTM a dozen times to be able to deploy this. Okay, the module. So, GC Notify is an interesting service. So you'll notice that there's two modules up here. One is Gov Notify, and the other one's Message GC Notify for the Drupal geeks among you. You'll recognize Drupal.org. GC Notify, if you go there, you'll notice that it's UK government, and you'll notice that it says that it can be used for the UK government, the Australian government, and the Canadian government. And you'll wonder, well, that's weird. Why is there a module that operates between three different governments? And this is interesting because this sort of platform for notification is a common platform that can be used across all of the different governments, and the technology, the APIs that are used to connect to them are common. And I'll talk very briefly about the differences between Gov Notify and Message GC Notify. So what I'm talking about today is Message GC Notify. This is the one that's in deployment among a number of different projects or a number of different applications of the Government of Canada. It easily integrates into Drupal web as well as GCDS builds. It has a bunch of different modes that it can run on so that you can test it. You can test it where it doesn't send out any messages. You can test it where it only sends messages to your development team, let's say. And then obviously the production mode. You can also limit the number of messages that are sent, especially if you've got a constraint around that. You have the ability to do bulk notifications. So you do not have to send single emails at a time. The feature also uses queues to deal with failures, and it's one of the key differences between Message GC Notify and Gov Notify. It can manage immediate notifications, or daily, or weekly, or monthly, any number of sort of interval where you want to collate notifications for a particular user. So if a user doesn't want to get hit every time a notification is sent out, they can register for daily notifications and get sort of a summary of those notifications in a single email. It uses templates, and the power of templates is that they're tokenized, and so within Drupal you can use tokens to populate and customize a particular message that you want to send out. And I'll give an example of that when we get through the real-life sort of implementation of this. And then independent of this, it provides a service that is sort of independent of the message subsystem itself. And so really the big difference between Gov Notify and Message GC Notify. So Gov Notify, if you go and look at that module, it's really just exposing the API, the Notify API to Drupal. From there, you can do whatever you want with it. But it doesn't give you a lot of structure on how you manage your messages, on how you build your messages. And ultimately, it does not have the ability to do bulk notifications, nor does it have the ability to do, sort of daily digest, the ability to create digests for users. How are we doing? Okay. People at the back, anyone napping? It is after lunch. All right. Okay. So, configurations. So a little bit of what I talked about before is how do we, so this is the module, this is the Message GC Notify. And it can be, you can see that some of the configuration here, I don't know if you can read that, but you can, run it in a number of different modes, test mode, team mode, and production mode. Team mode is really interesting because in team mode, you can run it so that it sends notifications to your team only. And this is a huge benefit when you're doing development because you want to make sure that obviously that the calls to GC Notify are working, but obviously you don't want to send emails out to everybody in production. And then obviously, we've got a debugging mode that you can put it in where it'll provide a little bit more logging in dblog. And then obviously you get your sort of configuration, right? So your base URL, the number of email addresses that you want to process, some template information, and I've hidden out sort of our API keys, our team API keys and test API keys. Those API keys you would get when you start working with the GC Notify team over at CDS, and they will, when you work with them, they'll provide you with those keys. You literally just provision them in here, along with the template that you're going to use, and Bob's your uncle. Okay, I want to talk a little bit about message subsystem and the reason why we use it. So, as I mentioned, the UK implementation of this is really just exposing the API call to Drupal. And then from there, you can do whatever you want with it. It provides you flexibility, but it doesn't give you sort of the structure that you need to actually message people. Because at the end of the day, when you're trying to send out a message, especially the particular implementation, the simplest implementation of a message that you might want to send out is It's the same message every time, which is maybe, let's say, an alert, right? Our system is down, right? It's the same message, goes out to 100,000 users, and that really is the simplest case. The more complex case is where you have changing information that you want to notify your users about. And the example that we're going to look at is recall. So the National Recalls application uses this. And anytime a new recall is published, people get notified. And so obviously that email is going to change every single time we send out a notification, because we need to change what the recall is for, the link to that recall, who does that recall affect, and what severity is that particular recall? Is it a mushroom recall, or baby seeds are being recalled? And so the reason why we use the message subsystem, and the reason why GC Notify, the module, relies on it, is because it gives us a lot of the functionality that we're looking for. It's a little bit more built up specifically to manage messages to your end users, and it does that by collating. So it's able to do daily, weekly subscriptions. It uses another module called Message Subscribe that allows users to be able to subscribe to your service. It also provides you some queuing, some more debugging ability, but more importantly, and this is the connection piece, over on the right there, you see the daily digest, and the notifier that we're using for that daily digest is GC Notify. And so what this does is, it says, okay, anytime I need to send out a daily digest, and I've built that up with all the different notifications that happen for that day, for that particular person, I'm going to use GC Notify to send that out. And that's the connecting piece that's part of this architecture, as part of the message subsystem architecture, to indicate that we're going to use GC Notify to notify. You'll notice that there's other options there, like email, for example, and that historically would be the option that you would use. Okay, so a little bit about GC Notify, really, really high level. So there's sort of two operating modes for GC Notify. One is single message. You pass it an email, you pass it a template. And I'll talk about templates in a moment. The other way you can operate it is bulk, in a bulk message, a bulk API call. Now the way these things work is you have to send it a template, and this template has to be defined within GC Notify. And it's a GC Notify template. And so, as I mentioned in the simplest case, of an alert, for example, that your system is down. Well, you would just build that alert in GC Notify. The text doesn't change. It's got the same title. It's got the same body. And you can always specify that template and send that out when your system is down. Then you send out a different template when the system is back up again. In the case of the more sort of complex scenario where you've got to change that message every time, they have the ability to accept tokens within their template. And so your template ends up being a title, a body that changes, and that might just be a token, and then obviously the email address, and then anything else in there that might need to change. But I'll talk about the challenges about this in a moment. And this is because when you set up these templates in GC Notify, you set them up with the team at GC Notify. This is not a Drupal template. Okay, this is a GC Notify template. Now, in the case of the bulk, it's the same thing. The only difference is that when you make that API call, instead of giving it just one email address, you say, please use my template for notifying people that my system is down, and send it out to these 50,000 email addresses. If you have more than 50,000, then you've got to make 1, 2, 3, or any number of API calls to be able to hit that. But definitely the challenge is in that template, and the fact that template is predefined, and we'll talk a little bit later on about some roadmap stuff that we're working with the GC Notify team on. Okay, so before I get into implementation and example, any questions about GC Notify? Yeah? Can they do encrypted messages? I don't believe so. I don't believe so. So it's meant to replace sort of email and text. So it can do text messages as well, but I don't believe it does. I'm fairly certain it doesn't do encrypted messages. Joel is shaking his head, and I'm seeing Mario and Brock having a conversation back there. No, I don't believe so.
Thank you.
Yeah. Okay. Recalls. So, health and safety recalls at Health Canada is an application that launched, say, 5 years ago. It's currently a top 3 task at Health Canada. It's a nationwide recalls application. It sits only behind COVID and the dental program in terms of visits, and I think both of those things are sort of on the decline. Obviously, COVID is still among us, but it's less pressing. And then obviously the dental program is new, and so that's getting a lot of traffic. But by and large, the recalls implementation is a very, very heavily used application at Health Canada. It's administered by only 2 people. And part of the reason why you only need 2 people to administer this is because GC Notify is taken care of for them. They do not need to worry about emails that are being sent out, tracking those emails getting blocked by spam filters. All of that is taken care of by the GC Notify team. Okay? As part of the implementation, you can actually see one of the recalls over on the right there for salt and food products with tahini sauce. I know we all just ate lunch, but I love tahini sauce. So the system is capable of differentiating between new and updated recalls. So if you get a recall for eggs, for example, salmonella, and it's a new recall, it'll have a label that says new. If then that recall gets expanded later on, we have the ability to flag it as an updated recall. You can see the tahini sauce recall is an updated recall with that flag. We're able, via tokens in Drupal, to be able to populate details of that recall. So we've got, the title of the recall, the link to the recall in the system, the product that's being affected, the issue, and obviously what region is that affected by. We'll see this in a moment, but the ability to customize that notification. So if I'm a Canadian and I have a child who has a peanut allergy, I can specify that I only want to receive notifications for peanut recalls, either labeling or what have you. Obviously, we're in Canada, we have to operate in English and French. Users have the ability to select the language that they would like to have that recall in. And then obviously I talked about immediate daily digest options. But here's an interesting number. So 125,000 subscribers, that's today. Or maybe it was a month ago when I did this. But it started at, I want to say 60,000. It's grown considerably. And it's grown considerably because of 2 things. So the recalls implementation, people primarily get this information either via news, right? So we see a recall on the news and says, hey, go click on this link. But I think the primary vector for people to come to here are through these notifications. That's why it's more than doubled since we've launched it. And then since we've launched it, we've actually included Transport Canada into the fold. And so now your vehicle recalls, your baby seat recalls, anything related to vehicle recalls is now in that system. And I'm not going to go into details about how that implementation is, but it provides one more centralized place for Canadians to be able to get their recall information. And all of this is facilitated by GC Notify. So that last number is really interesting. So last year, GC Notify sent out 60 million messages, which is a big number. And it does this with extremely high reliability. Yes?
Yeah, question about this recalls. Is that using the GC Notify Drupal?
It is. That's right.
Right on.
That's right. So it's using Message GC Notify. Message GC Notify. It's on Drupal.org. I don't know if I put a link to it in there, but I think I did put a link in the slide.
Is there much custom code that they had to do to get the, or is it all just basically configuration of the module?
It's there's two parts to it. So there's three modules. There's message subscribe, and message GC notifier is the notifier. It's the plugin for the notifier.
Yeah, use message is really good.
Yeah, and then there is a web form that's used for subscription,
Okay.
and that uses flags, which is part of Drupal if you're familiar with flags. And then the notifier uses flags to determine who it should notify based on the type of
Yeah, so they're storing like 125,000 email addresses somewhere
protected B cloud. Yeah,
in the cloud, but it's somewhere in a table on Drupal.
that's right. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
All right. Yeah, that's what
Along with what they're registered to receive.
Okay, yeah, and then they just send that off a couple of API calls over to this GC notify.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
Awesome.
So if it's an immediate notification, for example, then we immediately make, there's a batch of people who get immediate notifications, and then
This is government done right, yeah, I like this. Like the evolution of a government service where you're not reproducing your same
yeah, this is exactly it.
SSOs, your SANAs over and over again.
That's exactly it. Yeah, you got it. So
Really good.
yeah, so what Joseph was saying is, it's sort of what we're preaching, and is that when you centralize this service, it makes it really easy for you to procure because you don't have to go to procurement. It makes it easy for you to deploy, and with this module and your Drupal app, you can install those modules, configure it, deploy it, and you don't have to pass an ATO for the email sending side of things. Right? I think that's the big benefit. Thanks, Joseph. So here's the, so I mentioned, Joseph, the message subscribe module. So it's, so we've got a web form here that collects their information and collects their preferences for, whether they want to be sent immediately or daily. And, there's more to this form down at the bottom, but I didn't want to bore you with all of the options there. But you can, you can choose to be interested only in beverages or only dairy or only cannabis. If you're a cannabis consumer. Okay, I'm going to talk a little bit about limits. Perfect. So, one of the issues that we have as far as limits are concerned is this notion of the size of the message. And the reason why size of message is important, so there's a 10 megabyte message size and a 30-second processing time limit. And message size is important for us because in our particular implementation, we've got a token for the message because the message changes every time. We're not sending out, hey, our system is down. So that message changes every time we send out a notification. And it changes because obviously it's a different recall. And so because we have a token in there that changes every single time, we have to include the body of the message. And if I go back to this example, you can see what that body includes. It includes the title of the recall, it includes the link, it includes details around the product, the issue, and the distribution. And then obviously there's other information in there, such as how to unsubscribe, and I can't remember if it's a hello, it just says hello. It doesn't say hello Sam. But there's information in there that has to be passed to GC Notify anytime we send out a message. And those messages could be unique, they could be the same, it doesn't matter, because the GC Notify template that is set up so that we have to pass the body, because the body changes every time. And so because of that, we start running into limits that are more than just the limit of that bulk. So remember when I said that we've got a limit of 50,000 messages that we can send in a bulk message, or 50,000 email addresses? The issue is that API call is always going to be hitting the edge of that 10 megabyte size, and will definitely go over that 10 megabyte size if we try to insert 50,000 messages into an API call. And so this third point is sort of the inability to create those templates on the fly. So as I mentioned, GC Notify provides you the ability of creating a template through their sort of their system, but you can only specify a template to use. You cannot sort of create one on the fly. So if, for example, we had a recall that was for enoki mushrooms, for example, and that recall message for our immediate users are always the same. Hey, there's an enoki mushroom recall. Here's the title of it. It affects Ontario and Quebec, and it's a food recall, right? So the idea would be that we would be able to create that template on the fly. We would reach out through an API call to GC Notify, and we would say, please create me a template, and that template's going to include information about my enoki mushroom recall. And then when I make my API call to the 50,000 people, I can just specify that template. I don't need to put additional information into the token because it's already part of the template that I've programmed at GC Notify, right? 30-second processing limit, so that obviously is a limit on the API call itself. And you can imagine that if we had an API call that was 10 megabytes that had a bunch of information in it, we start hitting up against that sort of limit. And so what we found from our implementation with this specific sort of scenario is that we can at most send 5,000 messages at a time. It's still a lot more than one at a time. But it's just sort of part of the limitations that we found. And I'll talk a little bit about our roadmap next, just in terms of where we might be going with this and how we're working with the GC Notify team on this. So any questions about the limits? Okay. Anyone sleeping at the back? I'm always suspicious. Oh yeah, awesome.
Is batch API for this, or is this?
Yeah, so it's not batch API, it's actually queues. So we queue stuff, we queue messages to be processed, and those queues are then handled by a queue worker that is kicked off by cron. And so either cron via Drupal cron or cron via system cron, depending on how you want to implement it. Yeah, does not use batch. Batch has its limits. Okay. All right. Last slide before questions. Roadmap. So that processing limit time, I think they've already solved this. They've already increased the time to something else, but we ran into this last year, I want to say, when the subscriber growth sort of grew exponentially. But the second part is we're working with them right now to, or at least proposal stage, to create a new API call for us to be able to build those templates on the fly. And that's going to give us the ability to then create that sort of unique template for a single recall or a single notification. And then that will allow us then to, instead of making 6 different API calls for all of the smaller batches, we can do, say, 3 API calls to hit 150,000 messages. Okay. So that's really it. I've kept it really, really high level, both from sort of a business perspective, but also an implementation perspective. I know, Joseph, you had some questions about that, and I'm happy to answer any questions that you have. Any questions? Yeah.
When we did it at part of the application on cloud, the other part on premises, because the intranet is the one that gives access, administrative access, okay, to the emails, right? We download the emails, we go to GC Notify, we load the emails there, and then we send emails, okay? So you have a model there that you really want.
Sorry, I'm hard of hearing and I can't hear you. I'm sorry. Yeah, if you wouldn't mind.
Okay, so we need to collect the emails,
Mm-hmm.
from the external website.
Okay. Yes.
So we collect the emails to the external website,
Mm-hmm.
and we have the application that's collecting the same database internally on our internet,
Mm-hmm.
and download the emails administratively. We download emails, we get those CSV files, we go to the CSV file, we hold it there, and we send it. Choose a template, it's 36,000. That's why, okay? So you have a model that does that. I really want to.
Yeah, for sure. So, okay, so let me, so gentlemen from CFIA, they have a system that collects email addresses. Then they have to download that into a CSV file. Everyone's familiar with working with CSV files of email addresses. Then they have to load that into a system, and then from that system they have to send out emails. And so this is a very sort of common scenario, a very common use case for many of you who have to do this. And this absolutely replaces it. So how do you do this? How do you implement this? So as I mentioned, there's sort of three key modules that you need: message, GC notify, message, and message subscribe. Once you have those modules installed, you need web forms to create a web form to collect those email addresses. And then there's and message subscribe then will tag those email addresses with the thing that person is interested in receiving, or the type of notification that person is interested in receiving. And then in the back end, the whole system, going to Joseph's question, how much of it is configuration? It's all, so there might be a little bit of glue code in there, but by and large, it's all configuration. And this is not a sales thing. I'm happy to talk to you after this, or if anyone is interested in using this, after this, please come see me. Absolutely. Yeah, go ahead, Robert.
Do we know of anyone using this internally, like for non-public? Like, are there intranets or applications in government? And I don't know if that's a...
So that might be a great question for Mario. He's got his thumbs up. He's saying yes, it is being used internally. And what's interesting about this is if I look at, so the reason why we use message and GC message notify as a notifier is because we want to be able to manage all of the messages themselves. If you do not need to manage those yourself, you could use just gov notify, because gov notify, all it does is it exposes and allows you to configure your connection to GC notify, but it doesn't provide you it doesn't provide you all the weight of the message management piece and the subscription piece. And then you can integrate that with, say for example, your internal Drupal messages if you wanted to, if that's something you wanted to do. Yeah?
I'm asking questions that I should know maybe, but for Transport Canada,
Yeah.
do we do vehicle recalls through this as well? Or?
So we do, I believe so. I can have a look.
It says yes.
Yes, we do.
Okay. And that data actually came from a remote source. So
Yeah, that's right.
It's an interesting model that a separate system can
Yeah.
rely,
Mm-hmm.
and that can be used as content.
Yeah, so in the context of GC Notify, the question was, does Transport Canada use message GC Notify to notify users of recalls? The answer is yes. And it's an interesting model because Transport Canada actually doesn't use recalls, the recalls application, to manage their recalls. They actually have an internal system that manages all of their recalls, the recall numbers, and so on and so forth. And what's interesting about this is that this Health Canada system is able to integrate that data into Drupal. It's able to consume that information via a feed, I guess. It's like a JSON feed. And it's able to create those nodes in Drupal. You can search for those nodes in Drupal, and you can notify people about Transport Canada recalls in the system. And one of the chief complaints about, I don't know if this is true anymore, but I remember 5 years ago it was true, is that people couldn't find their recall on the Transport Canada website. So what do people do when they can't find stuff on your website? They go to Google. So they have to Google Transport Canada recall for my Honda Civic, my 2016 Honda Civic, and that's how they would find their information. Because we've wrapped that into a singular portal where not only can they find the information, they can register to be notified through GC Notify whether or not there's a recall for their car. that answer your question? Yeah, thumbs up. Yeah.
You said earlier that there's no necessity for a new SANA on a subsequent site that's being built. That presumes, therefore, that there's a security control profile which you're working to. And that means that if you've got a different site, that may have different sensitivity of data. Surely you have to still do a Delta SANA.
Yeah, so the question is, if you're deploying this on one site and you've got sort of a profile on how you're doing your SANA, and you're going to then go deploy this somewhere else that might not be collecting protected B information, for example, right? So I would say this. Generally, that is not the case. And it's not the case because we're collecting protected B information in the first place, right? So for this system to be able to work, we need to be able to collect an email address, and then we need to be able to send GC Notify that email address. And if you're using a vetted platform like Drupal Web, well, in our case, Drupal Web, but whatever vetted platform exists that's already gone through an SANA, that barrier is much lowered. And then in addition to that, typically when you go through your SANA and in the SRTM, there's a line that asks about, do you have any ports open? You have to say yes for your application because you're sending emails from your server. Well, in our case, we don't, right? So there's additional barriers that you have to meet if you're doing your own sort of mail management that you don't need to meet with this. Does that answer your question?
It does, and then there's a further question.
Sure.
So as of Jan 1 this year, controlled unclassified information CUI, which slightly raises the sensitivity of data. So it may be above protected data. So what about that? What about killing the security control profile? Like, I can't imagine that there's anything where everything meets a particular security control profile or a particular SANA. I've never come across that.
So I can only answer your question from the context of Drupal. We've deployed a lot of, so the question is, you've never come across the same SNA controls for two different applications. They're too dispersed, they're too different to be able to apply the same profile.
Particularly when you've got controlled unclassified information, because that.
Yeah. So I can only answer from the context, and maybe I'll pass this off to Manuel to talk about it a little bit, but I can only answer from the context of Drupal with GC Notify, or Drupal in general. We've probably done 4 or 5 SRTMs, some of which are collecting protected information, some of which aren't. And those security controls in the SRTM are, I would say, 95% identical in the way we answer them. Okay. Mario, do you know if there are any other sort of higher security profiles for whether it's secret, for example, information that we need to pass from a GC Notify perspective?
No, we don't support that.
Yeah. Okay.
But as an example, GC forms, which is by default GC Notify in our case, so GC forms has to do their security profile up to GC Notify, which is notified up to them. So
Yeah.
that would be, I guess, one example that is close to.
So it doesn't remove the need to be able to have to do an SRTM. It just removes the need for the communication part. Yeah.
On the flip side, if you had an SRTM cleared site or solution or intranet, you could bolt on the GC Notify features and not need
To redo it, correct. Yeah. So Robin's statement is that if you've already got an application that you've launched, let's say, that you've passed your SRTM, you've passed your ATO, you're now operating and live, and you realize you need to communicate with people, you can do so through GC Notify without having to worry about the email portion of that. Okay, time is it? It is almost time. Any other questions? Thank you very much. I hope the guys in the back had a good nap. Thank you.
Yeah.